Skinwalker ranch owner Brandon Fugel finally addressed the moment that nearly ended the investigation for good. In a rare unscripted statement, he admitted there was a point during excavation beneath the mesa when the team encountered something so unnatural, so reactive, that he immediately ordered the dig to stop. According to Fugel, the discovery posed unpredictable consequences and should have never been disturbed. Camera feeds were cut, thermal data confiscated, and the area sealed. Subscribe for the full breakdown, because what he just revealed changes everything. For months, the team at Skinwalker Ranch monitored unexplained interference patterns beneath the southern edge of the mesa, patterns that didn't match naturally occurring geological movement or standard electromagnetic fluctuation. The sensors, buried across multiple depth points, began registering rhythmic pulses at precise intervals, almost like something cycling or responding from below. At first, it was shrugged off as instrumentation error. But when multiple systems, thermal, seismic, and radar, recorded the same frequencies simultaneously, attention shifted. Brandon Fugel initially resisted excavation. Despite being the owner and main financial backer, he repeatedly warned that disturbing soil at locations with active anomalies had historically resulted in escalation, referencing earlier incidents when drilling triggered unexplained mechanical failures and skyborne activity. Pressure to investigate mounted after an unmarked low-pressure point was detected below the mesa that showed no geological reason for existing. The team believed there could be an underground structure, potentially artificial, buried, and undisturbed. Fugel hesitated, but approved the pre-excavation radar survey under strict environmental containment protocol. When ground-penetrating radar returned an image, angular, with seemingly straight-lined contours, debate erupted. Phil Torres argued it could be a chamber or collapsed facility. Technical staff believed it might be natural stratification, but the most unsettling point came from an acoustics consultant who noted the returned echo profile aligned more with open density, as if something hollow existed beneath them. Several advisors suggested pausing. A Ute tribal liaison quietly recommended avoiding that specific area, recounting generational warnings tied to that stretch of the mesa, stating, "The ground remembers what's placed in it." Fugel considered canceling, but after multiple failed attempts to explain the readings conventionally, he reluctantly authorized Stage 1 soil removal under daylight supervision only. The first dig was shallow, controlled, minor, and monitored live. Nothing unusual occurred, but as depth increased past the first meter, the anomaly reacted differently. Equipment stability dropped sharply, sensors failed to recalibrate, and the pulse pattern intensified. From that moment, the team believed they might not just be uncovering something, but possibly interacting with it. And as they moved deeper into the earth, reactions intensified. The moment the ground shifted was coming, and no one was ready. The excavation entered its second stage at 10:03 a.m., under strict control and supervised by both geological and technical personnel. With the initial meter cleared, everything appeared stable. Instrumentation still flickered occasionally, but no obvious environmental hazards emerged. A light wind moved through the canyon. Crew members later noted that it felt deceptively calm, as if the location was waiting. As the excavator dug past the 2-meter depth, however, the sensors, previously pulsing at irregular intervals, suddenly began registering at exact 10.6-second cycles, active across multiple platforms simultaneously. This forced the team to pause and recalibrate. The calibration failed. Drone reconnaissance was deployed next, but both drones experienced unexpected downward thrust, even with stable weather readings. Flight logs showed artificial interference manipulating altitude controls. The machines struggled to ascend more than 10 feet above the dig site. Engineers assumed electromagnetic disruption, but Phil Torres privately suggested something in the ground seemed to be pulling, as though resisting aerial observation. The digging resumed manually to avoid triggering automated system reactions. By late afternoon, the exposed area revealed discolored soil compressed into distinct layers, unnaturally flat, not consistent with natural sedimentation. A geologist pointed out faint trace elements of compounds that should not exist at that depth unless introduced artificially. The moment that raised the most concern came when a contractor accidentally placed his gloved hand against the soil deposit. He reported feeling a low-frequency vibration in his sternum, like a heartbeat inside rock. He removed his hand instantly and claimed his chest felt tight for several minutes. Data collected from localized ground sensors at that exact moment registered a 0.2 microtremor. Despite no seismic activity recorded within 200 miles, Phil requested deeper core sampling to understand what lay beneath the newly exposed strata. Fugel hesitated, but approved the test given the emerging significance. As the core drill advanced, air pressure around the site began dropping. For 17 seconds, sound meters detected a compression wave moving outward from the shaft. Yet, no wind occurred. The crew started hearing faint, rhythmic thumps, felt through their boots, not heard through the air. One technician later wrote it felt like being above something, breathing. They kept digging. None of them understood that what they were encountering wasn't being uncovered. It was responding. And within hours, the first truly alarming shift would take place. Because when night fell over the mesa, the ground itself began to move. Dig operations had ceased for the evening at precisely 6:48 p.m. While surface-level conditions remained outwardly stable, multiple team members had filed quiet concerns about prolonged internal unease. The monitoring posts were left active overnight per Fugel's request, collecting ambient seismic, thermal, and radio frequency data. Just before midnight, the first alert triggered automatically on the remote surveillance terminal. What registered initially appeared as a microquake, but the pulse signature did not match geological behavior. It was too symmetrical. Data compared against ambient wave patterns suggested directional energy pulsing from below, not lateral displacement typical of seismic motion. Phil was the first to return to the dig site, arriving with a field technician. The air was unnaturally still. Visual observation showed no shifts on the surface, but when logging sonar returned, what they saw was described as subsurface volumetric fluctuation, a slow uplift followed by a subtle release, spaced exactly 11 seconds apart, as if the Earth itself were exhaling and inhaling. Jessica arrived moments later and noted the ground felt slightly warm, despite temperature drops at night. Instrument readings showed a localized heat difference of 4.2 degrees, confined to a 21-foot radius directly around the excavation pit. The team activated ground microphones to isolate the source of the pulses. What came through was unlike anything logged on previous investigations. Instead of chaotic interference or audio warping, the signal was uniform, repetitive, like coded vibration. A field acoustic analyst later noted it resembled resonance intended to stabilize mass, not disperse it. Moments later, one of the stabilization sensors collapsed inward, falling into the hole despite being securely staked outside the cut line. Equipment readings began failing. Battery life dropped at accelerated speed, signal loss cascaded across receivers, and core drill telemetry spiked at 400% activity, despite being inactive. Phil radioed Fugel directly, advising temporary suspension and evacuation. According to internal report snippets, before issuing his directive, Fugel asked one question: "Is the ground rising?" The next reading answered for them. The soil within the pit swelled upward approximately 1.3 centimeters without external pressure. Movement was slow but undeniable. A technician watching the live thermal overlay gasped, claiming he saw a pattern forming along the lifted earth, something repeating the same frequency signature logged earlier. Then alarms triggered simultaneously across all monitors. The ground didn't just shift again, it reacted. And when the team replayed the footage from this moment, Fugel made the decision that changed the entire course of the excavation. During the incident, the primary live cameras failed exactly as expected once the anomaly spiked, but An auxiliary security feed, stored on an off-network recorder, kept running. It wasn't part of the official telemetry grid and only existed as a backup, intended for visual asset security. Hours later, when the crew reviewed the footage, nobody expected to see anything beyond static. What they found instead became the most alarming piece of visual evidence ever recorded at Skinwalker Ranch. At 11:53 p.m., as the soil rose and then slowly settled, the camera captured a distortion forming just beneath the excavation rig. It appeared as a faint compression ripple, followed by a sudden pull inward, like mass was consolidating in a localized pocket. Infrared overlay, for a split second, registered a human-sized void occupying the exact center of the pit. But unlike regular temperature anomalies, this one showed no heat signature, no reflection, and no surface disruption. It appeared, stabilized momentarily, and then sank deeper, as if aware of observation. Slow-motion audio sync revealed a harmonic tone that flickered precisely when the distortion appeared. One analyst said the anomaly looked like something under the soil was testing the surface tension, not breaking through, just applying pressure. When replayed with contrast enhancement, it appeared that faint branching cracks formed cyclically in the dirt, not random patterned, suggesting controlled stress. That's when Brandon Fugel, watching remotely, uttered the words later repeated in confidentiality. "Shut it down! We should have never dug there." The excavation officially ended in that moment, but the ground did not stop reacting. The moment the auxiliary feed was replayed and the anomaly's behavior confirmed, Brandon Fugel arrived at the control hub unannounced. Witnesses describe him as unusually calm but visibly tense, watching the footage on silent loop. After a prolonged pause, he requested the final seismic overlay. When the technician zoomed in on the subsurface displacement model, Fugel reportedly whispered, "It's zeroed in on the excavation point." Moments later, localized vibration returned, this time increasing in frequency, mirroring the exact timestamp where the technician earlier reported chest pressure. The crew noted that the readings didn't resemble geological activity at all. Instead, they displayed progression, targeted movement shifting lower into the shaft. At 12:07 a.m., he issued the official order. "Seal it immediately. No more cutting. No more testing. We shouldn't have dug there." Those words froze the room. Production halted. Excavators were withdrawn. Within minutes, the site became restricted, and the crew was repositioned outside the containment zone. Engineers attempted to document residual sensor output, but the readings began fluctuating independently, even with all equipment disconnected. Battery packs dropping to zero, core sampling rigs warming unexpectedly, and minor electromagnetic pulses clustering around the excavation rim despite zero incoming power. One contractor reported that the soil reshaped slightly again, this time not upward, but compressing toward the perimeter, like the ground trying to reset itself. He refused to continue work and later filed for removal from the project. Fugel personally instructed that the dig zone be filled and sealed with reinforced mineral packing, not standard soil. He demanded that no personnel re-enter the site until further notice and insisted that data logs skip automated cloud backup to prevent off-site distribution. In post-brief discussion, his stance shifted from curiosity to containment. "Whatever is beneath this mesa," he said, "it wasn't meant to be disturbed, and it knew when we tried." What he didn't expect was that the anomaly would continue reacting even after being buried. After the dig site was sealed and equipment disconnected, the crew expected activity to cease immediately. Instead, sensors that were supposed to be offline began transmitting residual readings without any recorded power source. Auto-logging captured a sequence of faint but consistent fluctuations in the newly packed material, as if something beneath it was still adjusting. At 1:14 a.m., nearly an hour after shutdown, the remote seismic monitor registered directional movement, not toward the excavation pit, but away from it. Slow, measured, deliberate, heading northeast along the underground gradient. Phil Torres, still on site analyzing live feeds, noticed that the movement aligned exactly with the path where the crew stood during their final minutes at the pit. Heat void signatures ran parallel to footprints captured earlier that afternoon. Forensic technicians later confirmed a 0.8-degree drop in temperature within those exact coordinates, like something was tracing the path back. One analyst noted the pattern mimicked human pacing. What alarmed the team wasn't the shift itself. It was what happened when they reviewed thermal scans from the moments after sealing. The mass didn't just move beneath the Earth. It elevated slightly, creating a spectral impression hugging the underside of topsoil. It followed where people had stood, pausing for seconds at points where crew members reported anxiety earlier in the investigation. At 1:26 a.m., a ground microphone, left unintentionally active, captured a low, gliding frequency that corresponded directly with the seismic shift. It wasn't random. The pattern matched the timing of the technician's heartbeat from the collapse event hours earlier. That's when the medical lead advised temporary withdrawal, stating, "If this thing can align to someone's physiology, we may not be at risk from proximity, but from recognition." The crew cleared the zone completely by 1:40 a.m., but the scans continued recording movement beneath the mesa. And by morning, at least one team member would admit they didn't sleep, not because of what they saw, but because of what they felt might leave the ground next. By morning, the excavation site showed no visible disturbance. The seal packing appeared intact. No instruments triggered alarms. On the surface, it looked as if nothing had happened. But the change didn't come from beneath the mesa. It came from the people who'd been closest to it. Within hours, 3 crew members reported deep chest pressure, not pain, but a sensation described as like gravity pulling into my ribs. One technician said he could still feel the rhythmic pulses they'd detected underground, even though no monitors registered ongoing anomalies. Another admitted he avoided stepping anywhere near the dig site, despite no logical reason, stating bluntly, "It feels like standing over something that remembers you were here." During medical assessment, mild tremors were observed in 2 individuals when shown footage of the excavation area. Even without sound, their heart rates accelerated in perfect sync with the timestamp where ground displacement had been detected the night before. A visiting analyst confirmed that even reviewing still images triggered physiological responses consistent with anticipation stress. No one wanted to use the word fear, but more than one admitted to feeling recognized. Psychological observations documented recurring dreams reported by 2 crew members. Both described being beneath the soil, aware of moonlight above them but unable to reach the surface. One wrote privately that they woke believing they heard the ground breathing through me. Neither returned to the mesa that day. Brandon Fugel suspended all subterranean operations indefinitely, stating that future investigations would avoid direct intrusion of ground-level anomaly. He reportedly told senior staff, "Whatever was under us, interacting with it may have allowed it to interact with us." What he didn't disclose publicly was that the anomaly had not fully receded, and in the hours ahead, records would reveal it wasn't finished reacting. Earlier today, when pressed during a recorded interview about why excavation beneath the mesa was halted without public explanation, Brandon Fugel finally addressed the event directly. His response was brief but deliberate. He stated, "We began digging because we believed we were investigating something passive. What I realized too late was that we were interacting with something active." The room fell silent. He went on to explain that while the team expected geological feedback or possible industrial remnants, what appeared during the survey showed signs of conscious reaction. It didn't behave like pressure release. It behaved like awareness, he added. When asked whether the team had disturbed something, Fugel paused before replying, "I believe we caused an environmental response that was not naturally occurring, and we should have never dug there." He emphasized the decision to cease operations was not made out of caution, but out of prevention. His final comments suggested deeper concern than logistical risk. Some discoveries should only be observed, not touched, because once you interact with them, they can interact back. The interviewer attempted to clarify if the phenomenon posed danger to the public. Fugel didn't answer directly. Instead, Instead, he said, "We sealed it because it reacted to attention. And if you air something like that, you amplify it." Seconds later, the network cut to a break. When cameras returned, no further questions about excavation were allowed. Following Fugel's statement, internal sources confirmed that the excavation site remains sealed under reinforced containment material, now monitored exclusively through remote sensors at carefully controlled intervals. No crew members are permitted to physically step onto the location without written authorization from both the medical supervisor and Fugel himself. Even then, conditions stipulate daylight-only presence and zero soil disturbance. Recent reports state that new anomalies continue to register intermittently: subtle changes in ground density patterns, low-frequency audio traces, and occasional microfluctuations in thermal readings. None have escalated beyond initial thresholds, but analysts note that each event spikes when historical footage from the dig is reviewed in proximity to the mesa. Production officials have quietly moved excavation operations to alternate areas with less sensor interference. Equipment originally used in the dig has been isolated in storage and flagged with a limited exposure protocol, meaning only designated personnel can access the machinery, and only while monitored. 2 technicians who experienced post-digature symptoms are no longer active on the project and requested assignment removal, citing prolonged internal dissonance. While no official statement links these symptoms to the excavation, multiple internal memos acknowledge persistent effect markers. To date, there are no plans to resume digging at the site. Future investigations will rely solely on above-ground scanning and atmospheric tracking. In a closed meeting, Fugel reportedly said, "We didn't find something buried. We woke something that already knew we were here." When asked if he fears that whatever reacted underground might re-emerge, he responded, "It's still reacting. We're choosing not to provoke it further." For now, the site remains sealed. The ground is silent, but few believe it is still. And while no formal closure has been announced, those involved in the dig already understand the truth. They will never dig there again. Not because they can't, but because they shouldn't. And the deeper question now isn't what's buried under Skinwalker Ranch. It's what might already be awake beneath it.
Brandon Fugel purchased Skinwalker Ranch to conduct transparent scientific investigation into one of the most paranormally active locations on Earth. For years, he's documented unexplained phenomena with cutting-edge technology and assembled a team of credentialed scientists to find answers. But something changed over the past 6 months. Activity at the ranch escalated beyond anything previously recorded, triggering responses from federal agencies that Brandon never anticipated. Objects violating restricted airspace, radiation signatures matching classified technology, and electromagnetic disturbances affecting military operations forced the government's hand. What started as private research became a national security issue overnight. Brandon Fugel is now breaking his silence about the government intervention that's changing everything about Skinwalker Ranch. Make sure you're subscribed because what he's about to reveal involves the highest levels of defense and intelligence communities, and the implications are staggering. The government's interest in Skinwalker Ranch didn't happen overnight. It was triggered by a series of escalating incidents that violated federal regulations and posed genuine national security concerns. It started in March when commercial airline pilots flying over Utah reported unidentified objects performing impossible maneuvers above the ranch property. Delta Flight 2437 from Salt Lake City to Denver reported a metallic craft hovering at approximately 30,000 feet before accelerating vertically at speeds that defied known aerospace capabilities. The pilot filed a mandatory FAA report, which immediately flagged the location coordinates: Skinwalker Ranch. 2 weeks later, NORAD tracking systems detected unexplained radar signatures originating from the same area. Objects appeared on military radar without transponders, moving in patterns inconsistent with aircraft, drones, or atmospheric phenomena. These weren't brief blips. Some lasted over 40 minutes, clearly visible to multiple tracking stations across the western United States. What really got the Pentagon's attention were the electromagnetic interference incidents. In April, Hill Air Force Base, located approximately 120 miles from Skinwalker Ranch, experienced communication disruptions during routine training exercises. Encrypted military communications were jammed by unknown electromagnetic pulses traced back to the Uinta Basin region. This happened 3 separate times over 2 weeks, always correlating with documented activity at Skinwalker Ranch. Brandon's team had recorded massive energy spikes on those exact dates. Then came the radiation readings that matched classified signatures. Dr. Travis Taylor's spectrometer detected radiation patterns that shouldn't exist outside government laboratories working on advanced propulsion systems. When those readings were cross-referenced with Department of Energy databases, alarms went off across multiple federal agencies. Someone or something at Skinwalker Ranch was generating emissions consistent with experimental defense technology that remained highly classified. By May, the FAA had issued official notices regarding the airspace above Skinwalker Ranch, citing unusual activity requiring investigation. Federal aviation investigators arrived, demanding access to Brandon's video footage and sensor data. The friendly curiosity that characterized earlier government interests transformed into something far more serious and legally threatening. Brandon Fugel's first official government contact came on a Tuesday morning in late May when 3 black SUVs arrived at Skinwalker Ranch without warning or appointment. Men in dark suits carrying Department of Defense credentials demanded immediate access to all video footage, sensor logs, and research data collected over the previous 6 months. They weren't asking. They were informing Brandon of federal requirements under national security statutes he'd never heard of. The lead agent presented documentation citing potential violations of restricted airspace protocols, unlicensed operation of equipment that could interfere with military communications, and possession of data related to classified defense projects. Brandon, a successful real estate developer accustomed to tough negotiations, immediately contacted his legal team. What followed was a tense standoff. The agents insisted they had authority to confiscate equipment and data immediately. Brandon's lawyers argued that private property rights protected him from warrantless searches. The compromise reached that day involved Brandon providing copies of specific footage while retaining originals, but the tone was set. This wasn't friendly cooperation between government and civilian researchers. It was adversarial from the start. Within days, Brandon received official letters from Pentagon legal counsel outlining serious concerns about activities at Skinwalker Ranch. The language was deliberately vague but unmistakably threatening. Phrases like potential compromise of national security, unauthorized monitoring of restricted frequencies, and collection of classified technical data appeared throughout the correspondence. Brandon's attorneys recognized this as legal groundwork for potential prosecution or forced compliance with government demands. The situation escalated when federal agents returned in June with equipment seizure orders. Specific cameras, radiation detectors, and electromagnetic sensors were confiscated as evidence in ongoing national security investigation. Brandon watched helplessly as thousands of dollars in research equipment was loaded into government vehicles. The agents provided receipts, but no timeline for return of the equipment and no clear explanation of what laws had allegedly been violated. Most disturbing were the private conversations federal agents had with individual team members. Travis Taylor was approached separately and questioned about his research findings. Eric Bard received calls from Defense Intelligence Agency representatives asking about specific experiments conducted at the ranch. The government was clearly trying to gather information while simultaneously intimidating the team. The airspace violations became the legal hammer the government used to force Brandon Fugel into compliance. In early June, Brandon was summoned to a classified briefing at Hill Air Force Base, where he faced a room full of military intelligence officers, FAA officials, and Pentagon representatives. They presented evidence that shook him to his core. Satellite imagery showed objects appearing above Skinwalker Ranch on 17 separate occasions over 3 months, each time entering restricted military airspace without authorization. These weren't birds or weather balloons. The objects registered on multiple tracking systems simultaneously, performed controlled maneuvers, and exhibited flight characteristics that violated known physics. Military officials explained that some of these airspace incursions occurred during active Air Force training exercises involving F-35 fighter jets. Pilots had been forced to abort maneuvers due to unidentified objects appearing in their flight paths. This created genuine safety hazards and operational security concerns. The Pentagon's position was clear. Whatever was happening at Skinwalker Ranch was interfering with critical military operations and national defense readiness. The briefing included technical analysis that terrified Brandon. Objects above the ranch emitted electromagnetic signatures matching experimental propulsion systems being developed under black budget programs. Either someone at Skinwalker Ranch possessed technology that should be impossible for private citizens to access, or something unknown was mimicking classified defense capabilities. Both scenarios represented unacceptable national security risks from the government's perspective. Brandon tried explaining that his team wasn't creating these phenomena. They were documenting naturally occurring or unexplained events. The military officials weren't interested in paranormal explanations. Their concern was simple. Restricted airspace was being violated, military operations were being compromised, and it was happening above property Brandon owned and controlled. That made him legally responsible regardless of whether he was causing the activity or simply observing it. The FAA presented violation notices that could result in millions of dollars in fines and potential criminal charges. Brandon learned that as the property owner, he could be held liable for anything originating from his land that violated federal aviation regulations, even if he had no control over the phenomena. The legal framework existed to prosecute him simply because the unexplained activity was happening above his property. By July, Brandon Fugal faced a legal nightmare with no good options. Federal prosecutors presented him with what amounted to an ultimatum during a private meeting in Salt Lake City. They had compiled evidence of ongoing airspace violations, electromagnetic interference with military systems, and possession of sensor data related to classified defense programs. The case they'd built could result in criminal prosecution under national security statutes, with potential penalties including massive fines and even imprisonment. Brandon's legal team reviewed the government's position and delivered devastating news. The feds had legitimate legal grounds to proceed aggressively. Property owners can be held liable for activities originating from their land that violate federal regulations, even without intent or direct causation. The phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch, regardless of their unexplained nature, were creating documentable violations that Brandon couldn't dispute. The government's offer was presented as mercy rather than punishment. Sell Skinwalker Ranch to approved buyers, specifically a consortium of defense contractors with existing government clearances and security protocols, and avoid prosecution entirely. The buyers would implement proper containment measures, coordinate with military authorities, and ensure future phenomena didn't compromise national security. Brandon would receive fair market value, potentially retain consulting rights, and walk away without criminal charges. Refusing meant facing federal prosecution with uncertain outcomes. Even if Brandon eventually won in court, the legal battle would cost millions and take years. Meanwhile, the government could seize the property under eminent domain laws, citing national security emergencies. They'd already consulted with Justice Department attorneys who confirmed this authority existed and could be exercised if Brandon remained uncooperative. Brandon spent sleepless weeks consulting lawyers, talking with the team, and agonizing over a decision that felt like betrayal of everything Skinwalker Ranch represented. He'd purchased the property to conduct transparent research and share findings with the world. Now he was being forced to hand it over to shadowy defense contractors who would classify everything and end public investigation forever. What really triggered the government's aggressive intervention was Dr. Travis Taylor's discovery in late April. A finding so significant that it justified every extreme measure the Pentagon subsequently took. Using advanced ground-penetrating radar and gravimetric analysis, Travis detected massive underground anomalies beneath the mesa that defied natural geological explanation. The data suggested artificial structures or technology buried at depths exceeding 200 feet, with metallic composition and geometric precision impossible for natural formation. Travis's analysis indicated these structures predated any known human construction in North America by potentially thousands of years. But the truly alarming discovery was the energy signature emanating from below. The underground anomaly was actively generating electromagnetic fields that pulsed in regular intervals, suggesting operational technology rather than inert artifacts. When Travis cross-referenced the frequency patterns with classified databases he had security clearance to access from his previous defense work, he found exact matches to experimental propulsion research conducted during Cold War black budget programs. Either someone had buried advanced technology beneath Skinwalker Ranch decades ago, or something unknown was producing emissions identical to humanity's most classified defense research. Travis submitted his findings to Brandon in a confidential report, recommending immediate consultation with federal authorities due to the national security implications. Brandon initially hesitated, knowing government involvement would complicate everything. But when the electromagnetic pulses from the underground source began interfering with Hill Air Force Base communications, the decision was taken out of his hands. The Pentagon learned about Travis's discovery through their own monitoring of the ranch and immediately classified the entire matter. This explained why the government moved so aggressively. They weren't just concerned about airspace violations. They believed Skinwalker Ranch sat above technology that could revolutionize aerospace capabilities or represented evidence of non-human intelligence operating on American soil. Either scenario demanded absolute government control and complete information suppression to prevent foreign adversaries from learning what existed beneath Utah's most mysterious property. The sale of Skinwalker Ranch was finalized in September for $214 million, far above the property's assessed value, but below what Brandon believed it was truly worth given the discoveries made there. The buyers formed a consortium called Advanced Aerospace Research Enterprises, comprised of defense contractors including subsidiaries of Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and several classified entities that operate under non-disclosure agreements with the Pentagon. The sale agreement contained provisions that Brandon's lawyers called unprecedented and draconian. Brandon would retain a consulting role with annual compensation of $500,000, but he'd have zero decision-making authority over research direction, data collection, or information disclosure. All findings would be automatically classified under Department of Defense protocols. The History Channel's filming access would be terminated immediately, ending The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch television series after the current season. Brandon fought every term, but had virtually no negotiating leverage. His attorneys warned that refusing the deal meant certain federal prosecution and likely property seizure under national security emergency powers. The government had already drafted eminent domain paperwork ready for immediate filing if Brandon declined the negotiated sale. At least this way he'd receive compensation and maintain nominal involvement rather than losing everything through forced confiscation. The most painful aspect was the non-disclosure agreement Brandon was required to sign. He cannot publicly discuss specific details about what Travis discovered underground, cannot reveal the full extent of government pressure that led to the sale, and cannot disclose information about the new owner's research plan. Violating these terms could result in prosecution under espionage statutes carrying decades in federal prison. Brandon Fugal, who purchased Skinwalker Ranch specifically to conduct transparent public investigation, now finds himself legally prohibited from sharing the most significant discoveries ever made there. The irony is crushing, but the alternative was complete destruction of everything he'd built over years of dedicated research. The Skinwalker Ranch team fractured immediately when Brandon revealed the forced sale and government takeover. Dr. Travis Taylor, despite his military background and existing security clearances, expressed profound frustration during an emergency team meeting that sources say became heated and emotional. Travis had dedicated years to rigorous scientific investigation at the ranch, collecting data he believed would advance human understanding of unexplained phenomena. Now that data would be classified, removed from public access, and potentially weaponized for defense applications, rather than shared with the scientific community. He understood national security concerns, but argued that transparency and peer review were essential to legitimate research. The government's approach represented everything he opposed as a scientist: suppression of knowledge for political and military purposes. Travis initially considered walking away entirely, but ultimately agreed to continue under the new ownership structure, believing he could do more good from inside than protesting from outside. His decision disappointed some team members who viewed it as capitulation to government overreach. Eric Bard's reaction was far more adversarial. As the principal investigator who designed many of the ranch's most sophisticated experiments, Eric viewed the government intervention as theft of intellectual property and suppression of groundbreaking research. He refused to sign non-disclosure agreements or accept employment under the new ownership consortium. Eric publicly criticized Brandon's decision to sell, arguing he should have fought the government in court regardless of the personal cost. Their professional relationship, built over years of collaborative investigation, ended in bitter arguments about principles versus pragmatism. Eric left the ranch in August and has since been vocal on social media about government suppression of UAP research, though careful to avoid specifics that might violate existing confidentiality agreements. Bryant Arnold found himself caught between loyalty to Brandon and concern about the investigation's future. As the ranch superintendent who managed daily operations and knew every inch of the property, Bryant understood the phenomena better than most. He'd witnessed things that defied explanation and believed the public deserved to know what was happening. But he also recognized Brandon's impossible position and the genuine legal threats he faced. Bryant chose to stay on under new ownership, primarily to protect the property and ensure whoever controlled it would treat the land with appropriate respect. His decision was pragmatic rather than enthusiastic. He needed the employment and hoped to maintain some continuity during the transition. Thomas Winterton's reaction reflected his long history with the ranch predating Brandon's ownership. As someone who'd experienced the phenomena for decades, Thomas had seen researchers come and go, each promising answers that never fully materialized. The government takeover was just another chapter in Skinwalker Ranch's long story of secrecy and suppression. The new ownership consortium's true agenda extends far beyond simple monitoring or passive observation of Skinwalker Ranch phenomena. Leaked documents and insider testimony reveal plans to actively weaponize the location and reverse engineer whatever technology exists beneath the mesa. Advanced Aerospace Research Enterprises has allocated over $400 million for expanded operations, including construction of underground research facilities, installation of military-grade sensor arrays, and recruitment of scientists with top-secret clearances to staff what amounts to a classified government laboratory disguised as private research. The primary objective is studying the underground anomaly Dr. Travis Taylor discovered for potential defense applications. If the technology generating those electromagnetic signatures can be understood and replicated, it would represent a revolutionary advancement in propulsion systems, energy generation, and possibly weapons development. Documents reference strategic aerospace capabilities that would provide decisive military advantage, language that suggests they're not just studying phenomena, but actively working to exploit it for national defense purposes. The government's secondary concern involves the airspace violations and unexplained craft appearing above the ranch. Rather than simply monitoring these incidents, the new research agenda includes attempts to communicate with or capture whatever is creating the phenomena. Proposals include deploying experimental technology designed to interact with UAPs, establishing protocols for controlled contact scenarios, and developing countermeasures against the electromagnetic interference that's been affecting military operations. This represents a dramatic escalation from Brandon's transparent scientific investigation to aggressive military intelligence gathering. Most disturbing are the contingency plans for what they're calling containment protocols. If the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch pose genuine threats to national security or public safety, the government has authorized extreme measures including complete evacuation of surrounding areas, establishment of restricted military zones, and potential use of force against unidentified objects entering the airspace. The ranch is being militarized with permanent security forces, weapons systems, and emergency response capabilities that suggest they're preparing for scenarios far beyond peaceful research. The government clearly knows more than they've publicly acknowledged about what exists at Skinwalker Ranch and why it matters. The aggressive takeover, massive financial investment, and classified research agenda indicate they view this location as strategically critical to national defense. Whether that's because they believe foreign adversaries are operating technology there, non-human intelligence is present, or ancient buried technology offers military advantages, the result is the same: complete government control and total information suppression. Brandon's public investigation threatened to expose something the defense and intelligence communities have worked decades to keep hidden, and they moved decisively to shut it down before revelations could spread beyond containment. The information suppression began immediately. History Channel footage was subpoenaed and classified. Episodes were edited to remove sensitive content. Social media posts about the ranch were systematically deleted. Witnesses received federal visits discouraging public discussion. Brandon Fugal, once championing transparency, now deflects questions citing confidentiality agreements. Within months, public interest declined as new information stopped flowing. The government achieved their goal: complete control over Skinwalker Ranch while erasing it from public consciousness.
Just minutes ago, information surfaced about a private mansion connected to Brandon Fugel, a place rarely discussed and never meant to be examined this closely. What began as a routine walkthrough quickly shifted when investigators encountered areas that were never listed, rooms that didn't appear on any plans, and evidence that raised immediate concern. Within moments, access was restricted and recordings were halted. Tonight, we break down what was reportedly found, why it was quietly buried, and what it could mean moving forward. Subscribe now, because stories like this don't stay hidden for long. And once you see what was uncovered, you'll understand why. The mansion tied to Brandon Fugel has always existed in a strange gray area. Publicly, it's described as nothing more than a private residence, another symbol of wealth and success. But those familiar with the property have long suggested that description barely scratches the surface. Unlike most high-end homes, this mansion was designed with layers of separation. Certain wings are isolated from the rest of the structure. Corridors subtly narrow, ceilings shift in height, and materials change in ways that feel deliberate rather than aesthetic. What immediately stands out is how little visual documentation exists. No detailed interior tours, no consistent floor plans. Even real estate records offer only broad outlines, lacking the specifics normally required for a property of this scale. People who have been inside describe a sense that the building wasn't designed to impress guests. It was designed to control movement. Sight lines are limited. Corners feel intentional. Sound behaves oddly in certain hallways, carrying farther than expected in some places and dying completely in others. More unsettling is the timeline. Portions of the mansion appear newer than official construction dates suggest, while other sections seem far older than they should be. Renovations were reportedly carried out in phases, often without public permits, creating internal spaces that don't align with original blueprints. This alone raises questions, but it's the purpose behind these alterations that matters most. Homes are built for living. Facilities are built for function, and this mansion leans heavily toward the latter. Those who reviewed partial layouts noticed entire sections labeled only with internal codes. No names, no descriptions. Rooms without window. Storage areas without visible access points. Even stairwells that appear to lead somewhere but abruptly end behind sealed walls. These aren't accidents, they're choices. And choices like this usually reflect something being protected, studied, or kept out of sight. By the time investigators stepped inside, it was already clear this was not just a residence. It was an environment designed to limit what could be seen, where people could go, and how much they could understand at once. And that realization set the tone for everything that followed. Because if the mansion itself was built to hide something, the real question becomes simple and unsettling. What required this much secrecy in the first place? Entry into the mansion was originally approved under routine circumstances. The visit was framed as controlled, limited, and procedural, with clear boundaries established before anyone stepped inside. Specific rooms were cleared, specific paths were outlined, and specific areas were marked as off-limits, with no expectation that those restrictions would be challenged. At first, everything followed that plan. Doors opened where they were supposed to. Lighting activated normally. Movement was calm, measured, and uneventful. Then, something shifted. Without warning, access systems behaved differently than expected. A secured door responded to credentials that should not have worked. Interior lighting activated in a corridor that was not listed on the access itinerary. According to those present, the change wasn't dramatic at first. It was subtle. A pause, a glance exchanged, the quiet realization that they were standing somewhere they had not been authorized to be. What made this moment disturbing wasn't just the mistake, it was the absence of alarms. No alerts triggered, no automated lockdown followed. Instead, the system allowed continued movement, almost as if the deviation had been anticipated. Those inside later described the feeling as being guided rather than lost, led forward by the structure itself. Hallways narrowed, sound softened. The atmosphere grew noticeably heavier the deeper they they went. Attempts to verify location through internal maps failed. Digital layouts no longer matched physical space. What should have been a short connector hallway extended far longer than expected, ending at a door none of the personnel recognized. This door lacked standard labeling, no warnings, no identifiers, just a reinforced surface and a manual locking mechanism that suggested it was never meant for casual use. It was at this point that protocol began to unravel. Communication slowed, decisions were second-guessed, and an unspoken understanding settled over the group. Whatever lay beyond this point was not part of the original plan, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it stayed that way. Beyond the unauthorized door was a room that immediately altered the mood of everyone present. It was not large, but it felt compressed, as if the space resisted being occupied. The walls were bare, unfinished in places, yet intentionally reinforced in others. There were no windows, no obvious ventilation, and no furnishings to suggest comfort or long-term use. The lighting inside did not match the rest of the mansion. It was dimmer, colder, and oddly directional, casting shadows that seemed to bend rather than fall naturally. The first thing noticed was the sound. Voices behaved strangely in this room, carrying too clearly at times, and then vanishing altogether mid-sentence. Footsteps echoed with a delay that didn't match the size of the space. Even small movements felt amplified, while larger sounds seemed swallowed. Several devices began to malfunction almost immediately. Audio equipment produced static. Cameras struggled to maintain focus. One recorder shut off entirely without warning. Temperature readings showed inconsistencies as well. Certain areas of the room were noticeably colder, while others felt unnaturally warm, despite no visible heat source. When handheld sensors were moved through the space, readings spiked and dropped erratically, as if the room itself was interfering with measurement. This was not environmental drift. It was localized and repeatable. What unsettled the group most was the sense that the room was not abandoned. Dust patterns suggested recent activity, yet there were no footprints, no tools, no signs of ongoing work. It appeared maintained without being occupied, preserved rather than used. One individual later described the feeling as standing inside a container rather than a room, something designed to hold more than just people. At that moment, attention shifted from curiosity to caution. This space did not exist by accident. It had been built deliberately, hidden carefully, and separated from the rest of the mansion for a reason. And as the group stood there in silence, one thought became impossible to ignore. If this room was meant to stay unseen, then simply entering it may have already crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Once the room was documented, attention shifted to what was stored within it. These were not decorative items, nor were they consistent with anything found elsewhere in the mansion. Along the walls sat containers made from mixed materials, some metallic, others composite, each sealed and unmarked. No labels, no serial numbers, nothing that suggested public manufacture or consumer use. Whatever these objects were, they had been intentionally stripped of identity. Several items appeared to be tools, but their design didn't align with conventional purposes. Edges were smoothed where grip would normally be unnecessary. Weight distribution felt unbalanced in ways that made handling awkward. A few pieces emitted a faint hum when lifted, subtle enough to be dismissed at first, yet impossible to ignore once noticed. None of the items were powered, yet they behaved as if energy was present. More troubling was the condition of the storage itself. Everything was clean, not unused, but maintained. No corrosion, no dust buildup on the containers themselves. The surrounding floor showed signs of careful movement, as though items had been repositioned recently, then returned to precise locations. This wasn't forgotten storage. It was active without witnesses. Attempts to photograph certain objects resulted in distortion. Images appeared blurred or slightly offset, even when taken from close range. One device refused to save files altogether while pointed toward a specific container. When the lens was moved away, normal function returned. That behavior was repeated more than once. At this stage, the assumption that these were harmless materials collapsed. These objects served a purpose, and that purpose required privacy. They weren't trophies. They weren't collected curiosities. They were part of a process. And standing in that room, surrounded by items that resisted documentation, one conclusion became unavoidable. Whatever was happening inside this mansion was not meant to be explained. It was meant to continue uninterrupted. Once attention turned to documentation, the atmosphere inside the mansion shifted again. Cameras that had been operating without issue began to malfunction. One by one, recording devices stopped capturing usable data. Some powered down unexpectedly. Others continued running, but produced files that were either corrupted or completely empty when reviewed. At first, this was treated as technical failure. That explanation did not hold for long. Audio logs were the first to disappear. Timestamps remained, but the sound itself was gone, replaced by low static or silence. Video files showed brief moments of clarity before degrading into distortion. In several cases, recordings ended seconds before something came into frame, as if cut intentionally. No one recalled pressing stop. No commands were given. The footage simply ended. Shortly after, instructions were issued. Documentation was to pause. Certain areas were no longer to be filmed at all. Devices already used inside the restricted sections were collected and set aside, supposedly for review. Those devices were never returned in their original condition. Memory cards were wiped. Internal logs were missing. Even metadata had been altered in ways that suggested deliberate removal rather than system error. What stood out most was how quickly this response occurred. There was no confusion, no debate, no attempt to troubleshoot on site. The decision to restrict footage came immediately, as though the possibility had already been anticipated. Those present understood the message without it being stated directly. Whatever had been captured was not meant to exist outside that building. Later, when partial material surfaced, it was heavily edited. Transitions were abrupt. Key moments were absent. Context was removed. What remained felt sanitized, stripped of the very details that would explain why recording had been halted in the first place. At that point, it became clear that the most disturbing discovery was not a room or an object, but the reaction itself. You do not erase evidence unless it threatens something, and once footage is taken away, the story no longer belongs to those who witnessed it. As details from the mansion were quietly contained, attention turned to something harder to dismiss. The structure, the restrictions, and the response did not exist in isolation. Similar elements had appeared before, at locations connected to Brandon Fugel, each time following the same trajectory. Initial curiosity, limited access, anomalies that resisted explanation, then silence. Architectural features overlapped in troubling ways, reinforced interior spaces, inconsistent layouts, rooms excluded from public records. At each site, witnesses described a shift in tone once certain thresholds were crossed, as if permission itself had layers. Even the language used afterward remained consistent. Nothing unusual, no threat, no reason for concern. Statements that explained nothing while closing every door. What made this connection unsettling was repetition. One unusual property can be dismissed as coincidence. Two can be argued as bad luck. But multiple locations sharing the same design philosophy and the same pattern of restricted discovery suggest intention. Someone was not reacting to events as they occurred. They were responding according to a plan already in place. When timelines were compared, another detail emerged. Each incident followed a similar sequence of escalation, then containment, access granted, then narrowed, documentation allowed, then revoked. Individuals involved became quieter over time, their public remarks increasingly vague. No single event stood out as the breaking point, because the breaking point was built into the process. This realization reframed the mansion entirely. It was not the origin of something disturbing. It was one node in a larger network of controlled spaces, each designed to reveal only what was necessary and only to the right people. The mansion did not raise new questions. It confirmed old ones that had never been answered. At that stage, the investigation stopped being about what was found inside a building. It became about why the same discoveries kept happening in different places, under different circumstances, yet always ended the same way, quietly, deliberately, and without explanation. When those involved finally exited the mansion, the effects did not end at the gate. In the hours that followed, behavior began to change in subtle but noticeable ways. Conversations became shorter. Messages went unanswered. Individuals who had been vocal during the visit suddenly avoided specifics, speaking only in general terms or declining to comment altogether. No one argued. No one protested. Silence settled naturally, as if it had been agreed upon without words. In public settings, the shift was even more apparent. Interviews that had been scheduled were quietly postponed. When questions were asked, responses were careful and controlled, stripped of emotion and detail. Body language betrayed unease. Eyes drifted. Hands tightened. The confidence seen earlier was gone, replaced by restraint. Whatever had been encountered inside the mansion lingered, shaping reactions long after the physical distance grew. Privately, some participants reportedly requested to be removed from future involvement altogether. Others asked for reassignment away from similar environments. These were not dramatic exits. They were quiet withdrawals, framed as personal decisions or scheduling conflicts. Yet the timing was impossible to ignore. The mansion had been left behind, but its influence had not. What made these reactions troubling was their consistency. Different individuals, different roles, same response. No one contradicted the official narrative, yet no one reinforced it either. The absence of denial spoke louder than confirmation ever could. It suggested that speaking plainly carried consequences no one was willing to risk. By the time days passed, patterns hardened. Phones stayed silent. Statements stayed vague. No follow-ups came. The event was treated as concluded, yet no one acted relieved. The absence of closure became its own answer, hinting that what was seen could not be undone, ever. In the days that followed, the absence of explanation became impossible to ignore. No official statement clarified what had happened inside the mansion. No denial was issued. No confirmation was offered. Instead, there was a careful redirection of attention, a subtle shift away from specifics and toward broader, less threatening topics. Questions were acknowledged without being answered. The event was neither acknowledged nor disputed. It simply faded from public discussion. This type of response is rarely accidental. When something is harmless, it is dismissed openly. When something is misunderstood, it is explained. Silence, on the other hand, is reserved for situations where explanation creates more risk than secrecy. Addressing the discovery directly would have required acknowledging inconsistencies, missing footage, and restricted access, details that raise more questions than they resolve. What stood out most was how coordinated the silence appeared. Different voices, different platforms, same outcome. No leaks, no contradictions, no attempt to control the narrative aggressively, just a collective decision to let it dissolve. That restraint suggested confidence, not confusion, as if those responsible knew that time alone would bury the issue more effectively than confrontation ever could. Behind closed doors, conversations reportedly continued, but none reached the public. The absence of even vague reassurance hinted that reassurance was not possible. Any explanation would have required admitting that something unexpected had been encountered, something that could not be neatly categorized or safely discussed. So instead, the story was allowed to remain unfinished. This refusal to address the discovery directly did not calm suspicion, it intensified it. Silence created space for interpretation, and that space grew larger with every unanswered question. The lack of closure became the most revealing detail of all, because when those in control choose not to speak, it is often because the truth does not belong to them alone, and once spoken, it cannot be contained again. When the mansion finally fell quiet, the most important detail was not what had been found, but what followed. The absence of explanation, the removal of evidence, and the coordinated silence all pointed toward a single conclusion. This discovery was not an anomaly, it was confirmation. Whatever existed inside that mansion was already understood by those in control, and exposure was the real threat. Viewed this way, every decision makes sense. Restricted access was not about safety, it was about containment. Missing footage was not accidental loss, it was deliberate protection. Silence was not confusion, it was strategy. The mansion functioned as a checkpoint, a place where something something ongoing could be observed, stored, or managed without public interference. This reframes the entire narrative. The mansion was never meant to shock the public because it was never meant to be seen at all. It was designed to operate quietly, to exist without explanation, and to remain effective as long as curiosity stayed outside its walls. Once attention reached inside, the system responded exactly as it was built to. The unsettling truth is that nothing ended when the doors closed. Whatever process was underway did not stop. It simply moved beyond view again. The reaction was not damage control. It was maintenance. And that distinction matters because maintenance implies continuity. If this discovery teaches anything, it is that secrecy is not always about hiding danger. Sometimes it is about preserving function. Some environments are hidden not because they are unstable, but because they are working exactly as intended. And that leaves one final question lingering in the silence. If this was only one location, carefully managed and swiftly contained, how many others exist that have never been questioned at all? That possibility, once considered, makes the discovery feel far less isolated. Indeed.
Something happened at Skinwalker Ranch that nobody is talking about. The cameras stopped rolling. Experiments that had been running for months were suddenly halted. Crew schedules were wiped clean, and the silence that followed wasn't the comfortable quiet of a production break. It was the heavy silence of something gone terribly wrong. The timeline is crucial to understanding what happened. In late spring of last year, production was in full swing. The team had scheduled a series of experiments designed to test a hypothesis they'd been developing over multiple seasons, that specific locations on the ranch responded to electromagnetic stimulation in ways that suggested intelligence or at least complex reactive systems. Camera crews were on site daily. Travis Taylor and the scientific team were running constant tests. Eric Bard was analyzing data streams in real time. Dragon, the ranch's security chief, was monitoring the perimeter. Everything was normal. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early June, everything changed. Filming stopped mid-experiment. Not paused, stopped. Equipment was powered down. The crew was sent home, and the official explanation was deliberately vague. Technical difficulties requiring assessment. But here's what made people suspicious. Production crews know the difference between a normal pause and an emergency shutdown. In normal circumstances, you finish the day's shoot, wrap equipment properly, schedule the next session. This was different. Sources close to the production describe it as abrupt. One moment cameras were rolling, the next everyone was being asked to leave immediately. Experiments that had taken weeks to set up were abandoned mid-process. The crew schedules tell the story. Up until that Tuesday, every day for the following month was blocked for filming. By Wednesday morning, those schedules were completely cleared. No explanations, no new dates, just blank calendars and a memo about indefinite postponement pending further review. People who'd worked in television production for decades said they'd never seen anything quite like it. The speed, the totality, the lack of communication. Perhaps most telling was the simultaneous silence from everyone involved. Travis Taylor, who regularly engaged with fans on social media, went quiet about ranch activities. Brandon Fugel, the ranch's owner who'd been open about experiments, stopped discussing current investigations. Crew members who used to share behind-the-scenes photos suddenly posted nothing from the ranch. It was coordinated, deliberate, the kind of silence that comes with NDAS and serious legal implications. This wasn't planned downtime. Production breaks are announced. Seasonal gaps are expected. This was something else entirely. A full stop in the middle of active investigation, leaving equipment in place and experiments unfinished. Whatever happened that Tuesday didn't just pause the show. It changed the entire trajectory of how the ranch would be investigated going forward. The experiment that preceded the shutdown was relatively routine by Skinwalker Ranch standards. The team was conducting electromagnetic testing in an area known for high strangeness, using a combination of RF spectrum analyzers, magnetometers, and high-speed cameras. They'd done similar tests dozens of times. This should have been unremarkable. What made this different was the consistency of the anomaly. In past experiments, strange readings would appear briefly, spike, then disappear. Interesting, but inconclusive. This time, multiple instruments detected the same phenomenon simultaneously, not just one sensor malfunctioning or picking up interference. Every piece of equipment, calibrated independently, registered identical anomalies at precisely the same time. According to sources familiar with the data, the readings didn't match any known category. It wasn't standard standard electromagnetic interference from power lines or radio towers. The signature was completely different. It wasn't geological activity. Seismographs showed no corresponding movement. It wasn't atmospheric. Weather conditions were stable. And it wasn't equipment failure, because once they swapped in backup instruments, the readings continued unchanged. But here's what really disturbed the team. The anomaly had structure. It wasn't random noise or chaotic signals. It showed patterns. Repetition, sequences that suggested organization. One researcher, speaking anonymously, described it as looking less like natural phenomena and more like data transmission, as if something was broadcasting on frequencies they happened to be monitoring. The data was concerning because it didn't fit into comfortable categories. UAPs can be explained away as misidentified aircraft or atmospheric phenomena. Geological anomalies can be attributed to unique mineral compositions or underground structures. Electromagnetic interference can be blamed on equipment or distant sources, but data showing clear structure, perfect synchronization across multiple independent systems, and patterns that suggested intentional organization, that was something different entirely. This wasn't interesting data that would make for a compelling episode. This was concerning data that made scientists stop and reconsider whether they should be conducting these experiments at all. Because if something was responding to their tests, if something was broadcasting back, then the fundamental assumption underlying the investigation was wrong. They weren't just observing passive phenomena, they were interacting with something active. The data review session that followed the experiment revealed something that shouldn't have been possible. Conflicting readings that violated basic physics were appearing simultaneously. Instruments detecting electromagnetic fields in ranges that should have required massive power sources, yet thermal imaging showed no heat signatures. Radiation detectors registering particles that left no trace on film or digital sensors. Audio equipment picking up frequencies below human hearing range, but sound pressure meters showing no corresponding waves. Scientists on the team started using a term they'd avoided throughout the entire investigation: impossible. Not unlikely, not unexplained, impossible, because the data sets were mutually exclusive. If instrument A was correct, instrument B's readings couldn't exist. If instrument B was functioning properly, instrument A's data violated known laws. Yet both were calibrated correctly, both were functioning as designed, and both were recording contradictory realities. Then came the detail that made everyone stop talking and start genuinely worrying. The signals didn't stop when they shut down the equipment. Standard protocol after capturing interesting data is to power everything down, verify the anomaly disappears, then power back up to see if it returns. This helps eliminate the possibility that your own equipment is creating the phenomena you're trying to measure. They shut down every piece of electronic equipment on the ranch. Generators, computers, sensors, everything. The baseline readings should have dropped to near zero. Instead, the signal persisted. Not as strong, but definitely present, which meant whatever they were detecting existed independent of their observation. It was there whether they were measuring it or not. And somehow, impossibly, their instruments were still detecting it even when powered off. But the truly disturbing realization came when they analyzed the pattern over time. The signal wasn't random. It wasn't consistent. It was adaptive. During the first hour of testing, it appeared in one frequency range. When they focused their instruments on that range, it shifted to another. When they broadened their monitoring, it split across multiple frequencies. It was as if something was testing their capabilities, learning what they could detect, adjusting its behavior accordingly. This crossed a fundamental line in scientific investigation. You can study phenomena that don't understand they're being studied. Weather doesn't know you're measuring it. Geological formations don't care about your seismographs. But if something is responding to observation, if it's adjusting behavior based on how you're measuring it, then you're not conducting passive research anymore. You're engaged in an interaction, and interactions can go both ways. Before this experiment, safety concerns at Skinwalker Ranch focused on practical matters. Don't stand under the drilling rig. Wear protective equipment during rocket launches. Maintain safe distances from high-powered laser and RF equipment. Standard industrial safety protocols for the kind of testing they were conducting. But after this data came back, the conversation about safety changed fundamentally. Medical monitoring of team members had been routine throughout the investigation. Blood work, basic physicals, standard stuff to ensure nothing on the ranch was causing obvious health problems. But in the days following this particular experiment, several team members reported symptoms that couldn't be easily explained. Severe headaches that lasted for days, sleep disruption, vivid dreams that multiple people described in eerily similar terms, a general sense of unease that persisted even after leaving the property. One researcher researcher described it as feeling watched, even at home, hundreds of miles from the ranch. Another reported technology malfunctions that started after the experiment. Phones dying randomly, computers crashing, electrical systems in his house behaving strangely. Were these symptoms connected to the experiment, psychosomatic responses to fear, or something else? The team couldn't say with certainty, and that uncertainty was itself concerning. Dr. Travis Taylor, who'd been advocating for increasingly aggressive testing to provoke responses, suddenly started talking about protocols and caution. Sources say he had conversations with Brandon Fugal about whether they were exposing the team to something they didn't understand and couldn't protect against. Not physical danger. You can wear protective gear and maintain safe distances, but psychological or neurological effects that might not show up on standard medical tests. The phrase that kept coming up in internal discussions was informed consent. Everyone on the team had agreed to investigate strange phenomena. They'd signed waivers acknowledging physical risks, but nobody had consented to exposure to something that might affect consciousness or cognition in ways medical science couldn't predict or treat. How do you get informed consent when neither you nor your subjects understand what you're dealing with? This was the moment when the investigation stopped being about discovery and became about exposure, about whether pushing for answers was worth potential harm to the people doing the pushing, and critically, about whether continuing to provoke responses was making things worse. Because if the phenomena could adapt, if it could respond, if it could somehow affect people even after they left the property, then every experiment wasn't just gathering data. It was escalating an interaction that nobody fully understood. Anyone who's watched the show closely over multiple seasons can see the shift. Certain locations on the ranch that were featured prominently in early episodes quietly disappeared from later investigations, not because they stopped being interesting, because they became too concerning to continue studying with cameras rolling and crew members present. One area in particular, a section near the East Field, was the focus of intense investigation in the first 2 seasons. High radiation readings, strange lights, equipment malfunctions, classic Skinwalker ranch phenomena. Then, after a specific incident that was filmed but never aired, that zone was quietly removed from the rotation. Experiments started happening everywhere else on the property. That particular location stopped appearing in episodes. The official explanation, when fans noticed, was simple. They were exploring other areas of the ranch to get more comprehensive data. But people familiar with the production tell a different story. After the incident, a decision was made at the highest levels that this area would be monitored remotely only. No personnel on site during active phenomena, no film crews. The zone wasn't abandoned because it was uninteresting. It was cordoned off because it was too active. What makes avoidance revealing is context. Throughout the show's run, the team has deliberately put themselves in uncomfortable situations, flying helicopters in areas known for equipment failure, digging in zones with radiation concerns, conducting experiments that they knew might trigger reactions. These aren't people who scare easily or avoid risk, so when they collectively decide that a location is off limits for direct investigation, it tells you something significant happened there. Sources describe the incident that led to the decision as a near miss, not physical danger in the traditional sense. No one was injured, but something happened during filming that made everyone present extremely uncomfortable. Multiple crew members refused to return to that specific area. Insurance concerns were raised, and Brandon Fugal made the call that whatever data they might gather wasn't worth the risk to personnel. The lesson here is important. Some areas aren't off limits because they're empty or explained away. They're restricted because they're too full of activity that nobody wants to interact with up close anymore. Observation from a distance is one thing. Direct exposure is something else entirely, and the decision to maintain distance after years of aggressive investigation speaks volumes about what they experienced in that zone. One of the strangest aspects of the shutdown involves the delayed reaction to footage. During filming, everyone on site was focused on equipment, data streams, and immediate observations. The atmosphere was professional, scientific, controlled. Yes, strange things happened, but in the moment, with cameras rolling and a job to do, people stayed focused on documentation. The unease came later, during the review sessions when editors started going through raw footage frame by frame, when producers watched everything that had been captured without the distraction of being on site. That's when people started seeing things that nobody noticed during actual filming. Details in the background, patterns in the data visualizations, sequences that didn't make sense when viewed in isolation, but became disturbing when seen in context. One editor described the experience as watching something change the longer you looked at it. He'd review a segment, mark it for inclusion, then come back to it hours later and see something different. Not literally different, the footage hadn't changed, but his perception of what was happening in the frame had shifted. Details that seemed insignificant during the first viewing became prominent. Patterns emerged that he couldn't unsee once experiments noticed. Multiple crew members reported that reviewing footage affected them more than being on the ranch during filming, which doesn't make logical sense. You'd think direct exposure would be more impactful than watching recorded video in a comfortable editing bay. But the repeated viewing, the ability to pause and examine frames, the process of trying to understand what they'd captured, that's what got under people's skin. Then came the reports from people who worked on the footage off-site, away from the ranch entirely. Editors in Los Angeles, color correction specialists in New York, sound designers who never set foot in Utah. They started reporting strange experiences, dreams about the ranch, a sense of being observed while working on specific segments, technology problems that seemed concentrated around footage from particular experiments. This is where things get genuinely unsettling. If phenomena could somehow extend beyond the physical location through recorded media, then documentation wasn't a safe distance observation anymore. It was a vector. Every copy of the footage, every hard drive, every review session, potentially extending whatever was happening at the ranch to people who'd never been there. The real shock didn't come from being present during the experiments. It came from trying to understand what had been captured afterward. Networks shut down productions for predictable reasons: budget overruns, declining ratings, cast conflicts, safety violations, standard entertainment industry issues that happen all the time and get resolved through normal business processes. What happened with Skinwalker Ranch wasn't any of those things. The show was profitable, ratings were strong, the team worked well together. By every conventional metric, production should have continued. But there's a difference between a ratings problem and a liability problem. Ratings can be fixed with better marketing or format changes. Liability issues, especially ones involving crew health and safety, require immediate action and careful legal review. When multiple people start reporting psychological effects, when medical concerns arise, when insurance companies start asking questions, that's when network executives get involved directly. Sources within the network describe a series of high-level meetings that happened in the days following the shutdown. Legal teams were consulted, insurance carriers were notified, medical professionals were brought in to evaluate crew members. This wasn't creative executives discussing storylines. This was risk management trying to understand potential exposure and liability. The decision to pause production came from above the show's production team. Brandon Fugal owns the ranch and could have continued private investigations. The core team wanted to keep working. But when a network's corporate structure gets involved, when lawyers start reviewing what happened rather than producers, that signals a fundamental shift from entertainment concerns to legal and safety concerns. What makes this shutdown different from past controversies or production problems is the speed and completeness. Past issues with paranormal shows have led to format changes or cast replacements. This led to a full stop. No announcements about retooling, no statements about when filming might resume, just vague mentions of technical issues and ongoing assessment, the kind of corporate language that indicates serious concerns being discussed privately while public statements remain deliberately uninformative. Someone higher up decided this shouldn't continue, at least not in its current form. Whether that decision was driven by genuine concern for crew safety, fear of legal liability, or something else entirely, we may never know. But the fact that it happened, that a successful show with strong ratings was shut down mid-season without clear explanation, tells you everything about how seriously this situation was taken at the highest corporate levels. Every reality show captures far more footage than ever makes it to air. For every hour of television, you might shoot 30 or 40 hours of raw material. Most of what gets cut is boring. Equipment setup, failed takes, conversations that don't advance the narrative. But sometimes footage gets cut for other reasons. Because it doesn't fit the show's format, because it raises questions the producers can't answer, because it's too ambiguous to include but too clear to completely dismiss. Skinwalker Ranch has an archive of footage that was never meant to be aired, experiments that produced results too strange to contextualize in a television format, moments where equipment behaved in ways that suggested either massive technical failure or phenomena beyond current explanation, crew reactions that were too genuine, too unsettled to fit the show's somewhat measured scientific tone. One particular piece of footage, described by multiple sources but never publicly released, shows an experiment where everything went wrong at once. Multiple equipment failures, data streams contradicting each other in real time, and in the background, something visible on thermal cameras that shouldn't have been there. Not a person, not an animal, something that registered heat in patterns that didn't match any known biological signature. The footage was reviewed extensively, enhanced, analyzed by multiple experts. The consensus was that it showed some something real, something physical enough to register on multiple sensors, but what it showed couldn't be easily explained. It wasn't clear enough to definitively prove anything extraordinary, but it was too clear to dismiss as equipment malfunction or misidentification. It existed in the uncomfortable middle ground where debunking fails but proof remains elusive. The decision was made to keep this footage in the vault, not because it was boring or irrelevant, because silence can be a form of containment. If you can't explain something and you can't debunk it, sometimes the safest option is to not show it at all. Let people speculate about what might have been captured rather than giving them actual footage that raises more questions than it answers. This is where the shutdown becomes most interesting from a disclosure perspective. Everything that aired on the show was carefully curated to be compelling but ultimately explainable within the show's framework. Mysterious but not definitively proven. The footage that never aired, that sits in archives under legal protection and non-disclosure agreements, that might tell a very different story. Not everything is debunked by science and skepticism. Some things are simply buried because they don't fit into comfortable narratives about what's possible. The question everyone asks is whether the ranch is still active without cameras, whether experiments continue privately, whether the phenomena that made Skinwalker Ranch famous persist when nobody is watching or documenting. The answer, based on everything we can piece together, is yes. Activity continues, investigation continues, but the nature of how it's being studied has fundamentally changed. Brandon Fugal has made it clear the ranch remains a focus of serious scientific investigation, but that investigation is happening differently now. More remote monitoring, more automated data collection, less direct human presence during active phenomena. The shift suggests lessons learned from whatever led to the shutdown. That proximity to certain events carries risks that can be mitigated through distance and technological intermediation. The patterns observed over years of investigation suggest that whatever happens at Skinwalker Ranch doesn't depend on human observation. The phenomena existed before the show. They'll exist after. Cameras and scientific instruments might make the events visible and documentable, but they don't create them, which raises an uncomfortable question. If filming stops but activity continues, what was the investigation actually accomplishing besides documentation? Some researchers argue that aggressive investigation, deliberately provoking responses, attempting to trigger phenomena through experimentation, might have escalated whatever exists there. That each rocket launch, each drilling operation, each electromagnetic pulse wasn't just observing passive phenomena, but actively engaging with something responsive, and that engagement potentially made things worse. The shutdown might represent a recognition that the paradigm was wrong. You can't treat intelligent, responsive phenomena like laboratory subjects. You can't provoke and measure something that might be measuring you back. The scientific method works beautifully for studying things that don't know they're being studied. It becomes problematic when the subject of investigation is aware of the observer and potentially capable of responding in ways that affect the observer. Looking forward, Skinwalker Ranch will likely remain an active research site, but the research will be more cautious, more respectful of boundaries that weren't clear until they were crossed, less focused on making compelling television, and more concerned with understanding phenomena without unnecessarily escalating interaction. Because the ultimate lesson of the shutdown is simple. Stopping observation doesn't stop activity, but it might stop whatever consequences come from aggressive investigation of things we don't yet understand.
Dr. Travis Taylor is finally breaking his silence. Minutes ago, he revealed that an entire episode of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch was permanently banned, not because of safety, not because of technical failure, but because of something they recorded in the sky that night. A silent object hovering above the mesa disrupted every camera, sensor, and data log simultaneously. Production never aired the episode. Until now, no one knew why, and what Travis just exposed may explain why government officials arrived before sunrise. Subscribe before we continue. It began with a hesitation. During a recent behind-closed-doors interview for a scientific symposium, Dr. Travis Taylor was discussing the evolution of Skinwalker Ranch research when a reporter asked a casual question about never-before-seen data. Travis paused, long enough that the room fell silent. Then, instead of brushing it off like he had done countless times in past interviews, he leaned into the microphone and quietly admitted that one investigation during production was forcibly halted. and the entire episode was banned from ever airing. According to Travis, it was not due to safety errors, lost footage, or team disputes, but because of what appeared in the sky. Until that moment, no one in the public was supposed to know it even existed. He explained that filming took place late into the night on a routine weather monitoring test. At 1:43 a.m., sensors picked up a sudden magnetic spike above the mesa. Travis noted it as a probable equipment glitch. 30 seconds later, the spike doubled. Crew members described feeling a subtle vibration in the ground beneath their feet, as though something unseen had shifted above them. The atmosphere changed, silent, heavy, like static before lightning. But the sky was clear. As cameras turned upward, a dark shape emerged just beyond the thin cloud layer. No light, no sound, no heat signature consistent with aircraft. Travis says it moved with intentional stillness, remaining suspended, as if physically anchored to the airspace. Moments later, every camera pointed at the object froze. The feed didn't go black. It locked, timestamp running, image unchanged. Within minutes, drones dropped, equipment rebooted, all recorded files from that hour corrupted completely. Production notified network executives by satellite phone. By sunrise, an order had come in: do not mention it again. And for the first time, Travis Taylor just did. According to Travis, what made that night so disturbing wasn't just the unidentified object floating silently above the mesa. It was how impossible it was to scientifically categorize. At first glance, the team suspected an experimental military drone or satellite flare. But the object seemed to generate no thermal trace, no transponder signal, and exerted sudden localized electromagnetism without registering any known propulsion. The data captured in the first 18 seconds before the equipment failure reflected directional interference, almost like targeted pressure applied to specific camera angles. It reacted to being observed, Travis stated. He claims they captured a split-second frame before system lock, a shape almost disc-like, but appearing semi-translucent, as if light warped around it. The absence of heat signature puzzled him most. If it was metal, we'd see thermal buildup. If it was plasma or energy-based, there would be dissipation. This was neither. Moments after the still image was frozen, several team members reported experiencing short-term disorientation. One crew operator described it as "my depth perception twisting inward." Another, usually skeptical, claimed a high-frequency ringing sound for nearly 40 seconds that didn't register on any device. The stationary weather sensors, however, spiked into what Travis described as vector disturbance frequencies, anomalous readings known to mimic gravitational variation. What terrified them wasn't that something was there. It was that whatever it was knew they were watching it. Instead of retreating or accelerating like objects have been seen doing before, it held its position mid-air, as if absorbing data from them. Electricity in the generator surged, cameras glitched in rotation. Communication lines went from normal to scrambled audio, momentarily transmitting reversed speech across the team's comms. At 1:46 a.m., without any visible movement, the object vanished. Not darting away, just gone. Sensors instantly flatlined, and that's when they realized the night had just begun unraveling. Seconds after the object blinked out of existence, every live feed on their central monitor wall flipped from tracking sky angles to pointing directly at the team. No one touched the control. According to Travis, it looked as though someone, or something, had remotely overridden the camera matrix. Each camera, positioned across multiple acres and locked on fixed survey patterns, simultaneously shifted inward to center on the men and women in the command trailer. It was watching them back. The tech team scrambled. Systems were manually rebooted, cables were physically pulled, backup batteries were disengaged, yet the feeds remained active. Our equipment wasn't online, yet it was still broadcasting, Travis recalled. It was like the entire system had a memory of us, even after it was dead. Audio clips recovered later were far worse. A total loss of radio communication occurred for 2 minutes and 24 seconds. But during that blackout, static wasn't silent. Instead, fragments of conversations, their own voices from earlier in the evening, began playing back, distorted and reversed, as if mocking them. One clip repeatedly looped Travis's earlier statement, "We must observe without interfering." Only the playback distorted it into something horrifying. "We observe, you interfere." Temperature inside the trailer dropped 15 degrees in under a minute, cold, without wind or reason. The generator outside surged erratically. Several crew members described feeling as if an invisible pressure pressed against their chest, making breath difficult. A seasoned military contractor, normally composed under stress, abruptly exited the trailer without explaining why and refused to return for the remainder of the night. When the camera feeds finally cut to black, one screen, just one, remained lit. It showed an infrared silhouette standing approximately 40 yards from the trailer, not moving, no heat output, just an outline of a figure-shaped void. Travis stepped outside to confirm visually. There was nothing there, yet inside, the image stayed on screen until all power died. That was the moment he realized this wasn't just technology failing, it was being controlled. After the camera feeds cut to black and the silhouette vanished from the infrared monitor, the team retreated from the trailer, rattled but trying to regain control. Travis, always the scientific anchor, ordered a full reset of the command center. Backup power was initiated using portable generators, and 3 researchers attempted to re-establish baseline communications with the off-site monitoring facility. What happened next pushed the team from shaken to deeply disturbed. At precisely 2:13 a.m., while rebooting the external tracking system, the FLIR, forward-looking infrared, unit atop the ridge locked onto a moving target without user command. Startled, the tech team watched the object return at low altitude, traveling at a speed estimated between 400 and 600 miles per hour. Even more unnerving than its velocity was its flight pattern. It wasn't moving through the air. It appeared to phase or skip across the sky, leaving no thermal trail except during brief microbursts when it sharply altered direction at impossible angles. "This thing didn't bank like an aircraft," Travis later explained. "It pivoted like it wasn't flying, like it was teleporting in extremely short bursts." 3 seconds later, every animal in the surrounding field went silent. 25 seconds after that, seismic sensors registered a sudden, intense, energetic pulse originating above the mesa, approximately 250 feet off the ground. The atmospheric pressure spike caused several on-site monitoring tablets to shatter without impact. The smell of ozone filled the air, and a faint electrical crackling could be heard. Described by one crew member as like static crawling across metal, the unidentified object paused directly above the mesa plateau, motionless for nearly 18 seconds. During that stillness, all remaining audio logging equipment captured a low-frequency humming that fluctuated between 17 and 19 hertz, the same range associated with migraine induction, visual disturbances, and flight or fight activation in humans. Several crew members reported nausea, disorientation, and extreme emotional unease. Then came what terrified them most. The object didn't just depart. It ascended vertically at such velocity, the instrumentation could only record the start of acceleration before contact was lost. No sonic boom, no visible displacement of air. It simply vanished. Moments later, the primary system console, which had remained offline since the blackout, powered back on by itself. A single message appeared across all screens. "Not yours to see." No one in the command center typed it. That was the moment Travis Taylor realized this was no longer observation. They were part of the experiment, and the question none of them could shake was, how long had it been watching them first? The mesa went dark again after the message appeared on the monitors, but the team wasn't done processing what they just witnessed when another wave hit. This time not visual, but electrical. Travis ordered the remaining equipment to be shut down. He wanted controlled silence, no interference. Yet, even with power cut off at the breaker box, handheld EMF meters began spiking higher than any reading previously recorded on the ranch. The spikes weren't random, they were patterned. One meter flashed at 2.4 milligauss, then 4.8, then 9.6, ascending in a perfect doubling sequence as though mapped to a binary progression. Travis, shocked, muttered, "That's not natural. Something's counting." Before the crew could respond, the EMF readings jumped past measurable thresholds. The instruments overloaded and went silent. Immediately after that silence, every smartphone in the command area, powered off and with batteries removed, vibrated simultaneously. When they checked the screens, each displayed the same thing, a timestamp of 2:13:18. The exact second the object paused above the mesa before its vertical departure. They hadn't taken their phones outside. They hadn't stood beneath the object. It had marked them from afar. As the EMF wave continued radiating outward, crew members reported a strange static sensation along their arms, as though hair follicles were being tugged. One historian on site began speaking incoherently, referencing dates from 1776, 1947, and 2023 in rapid succession, none of which connected coherently. Another researcher suddenly vomited without showing any symptoms moments prior. Several described the sensation of pressure inside their ears, as though they'd entered a deep underwater descent. The most unsettling response came from a former military intelligence officer assigned to observe the ranch operations. He froze in place, eyes unfocused, and whispered, "It's testing our reactions. It's seeing how far it can push." When asked what it was, he blinked, regained awareness, and claimed no memory of speaking. Travis later theorized that the surge wasn't merely energy, it was directional stimulus, something probing both physiology and cognition. Minutes after the wave dissipated, a geologist monitoring subterranean channels reported a sudden pressure flux beneath the mesa, the same pattern observed before past anomalies involving cattle decompressions and light beam anomalies. The implication chilled Travis more than anything else that night. Whatever was above wasn't just affecting electronics, it was probing the people, testing what the human threshold was, and the energy signatures indicated one alarming truth, that whatever they encountered was not leaving. It was repositioning, waiting, or worse, preparing for the next escalation. Following the EMF surge, the research team was advised to suspend investigation and evacuate until conditions stabilized. Travis, however, insisted they review all data before leaving the property. "If we walk now without understanding what just happened," he said, "we may never get another chance." It would be a decision that many on the crew later regretted. At approximately 3:07 a.m., they attempted one final sweep of the mesa access point. 3 team members, including Travis, stepped outside the command trailer with handheld detection gear and radiation counters. Temperatures were stable. EMF was no longer spiking. But the moment they passed beyond the floodlight's perimeter, their radios crackled. Not with static, but with their own voices from earlier that day. One transmission repeated a phrase that Travis had uttered during routine setup hours earlier. "If tonight is quiet, we look deeper." Except the playback warped it. "If they're quiet tonight, we go deeper." The distinction hit hard. As they neared the mesa's shadow line, the ridge monitoring unit, completely disconnected since the blackout, activated on its own. A deep, bass-like vibration rolled under their feet. The sensation was similar to standing next to a freight train passing under the ground. The radiation counter jumped from normal levels to nearly 30 microsieverts in under 5 seconds, forcing them to halt. One operator began bleeding lightly from his nose. Then, the environment shifted. Wind began blowing from the wrong direction, inward, toward the mesa, even though weather records confirmed still air that night. Dust, leaves, and dry brush gravitated towards a point near a rock shelf. It was like the land itself was exhaling towards something unseen. Travis shouted for retreat, but the ground suddenly rumbled, a shallow quake without any seismographic alerts off-site. Then the floodlights went out, all of them. Every single light source, even battery lanterns and infrared beams, extinguished instantly, as if swallowed rather than shut off. One team member screamed in the darkness, not out of pain, but panic. He reported seeing movement beside him, a humanoid outline walking parallel, matching his pace without producing sound. Others felt a sudden gravitational pull toward the mesa, as though their center of mass was temporarily manipulated. Travis, barely able to see, issued the command to abort and fall back to the trailer. The entire retreat happened in silence. No footsteps heard except their own. No wind, only pressure. When they reached the threshold of the command center and crossed under the canopy, the lights returned. Instant, no flicker. Everything was exactly as it had been 5 minutes prior, except one piece of equipment, a handheld thermal scope, had captured a single frame during the blackout. On reviewing it, white-hot signatures of multiple human-shaped figures could be seen descending from above the mesa, spaced evenly apart, right where the air pressure had centered minutes earlier. Travis marked that moment in his private field log with a single sentence: "It didn't want us near that location, not to observe, not to understand, because something was there it was trying to protect or hide." And that is when he knew if they stayed any longer, they wouldn't have been allowed to leave. Once the team reassembled inside the command trailer, shaken and covered in dirt, an urgent internal debate began, not about what they had witnessed, but whether any of it should ever leave the ranch. Multiple crew members argued it posed too great a risk, not only scientifically but psychologically and possibly politically. Travis, visibly distressed but trying to maintain composure, stated that what they recorded could redefine everything we think we understand about physics, surveillance, and possibly intelligence that predates us. Minutes after power fully stabilized, backup drives automatically initiated data synchronization through the network hub. But something happened that no one had expected. The footage and sensor logs tied directly to the blackout window began vanishing in real time. Audio clips were replaced with blank static. Video feeds rewound and rewrote themselves to erase the object above the mesa, the thermal outlines, and all EMF telemetry from the surge. A tech specialist attempted to isolate the data and force manual preservation, but the system overwrote everything directly on the drives. When they disconnected them physically, the damage was already done. It was as if the ranch itself had edited the files. A heated confrontation erupted. One senior advisor demanded they report the incident to federal partners immediately, claiming the signature was not of known terrestrial origin. Another, who had observed similar anomalies tied to classified projects, countered, warning that disclosure could result in shutdown of the entire program and seizure of all personal materials. One researcher, in near tears, suggested destroying the surviving notes entirely and quietly ending the investigation before someone got hurt. That's when the head of security entered the room with updated clearance protocols from higher up. According to him, the incident had already been forwarded through encrypted channels, but the official response was chillingly brief. Suspend analysis. Do not pursue replication. Not for public release. No mention of safety. No questions about what happened. Just a directive to stop. Travis pushed back. He argued that halting investigation meant abandoning all scientific integrity. What we saw was deliberate, he said. Whatever interacted with us demonstrated the ability to not only affect our surroundings, but to erase our documentation of it. If we don't try to understand it, we remain at its mercy. But the reply that came next from the comms officer silenced the room. They didn't say, "Don't research it." They said, "Don't try to show it." That distinction landed like a warning shot. It wasn't that the discovery couldn't be studied. It simply couldn't be witnessed by anyone outside that compound. And so, that's how the decision was made. Not to deny what happened, but to contain it. The footage wasn't just lost. It was intentionally buried because someone or something had made it very clear that the world isn't supposed to see what really happened that night above the mesa. In the months that followed, silence became policy. Contracts were extended, statements were moderated, and that night was officially categorized as data corrupted due to environmental interference. But off-camera, the crew's behavior spoke volumes. Several members left the field entirely, some reporting persistent nightmares of a figure standing beyond their window, while others claimed their electronics would activate without power, just like the ranch equipment did during the incident. One technician even relocated out of state, telling a colleague, "I can work somewhere with ghosts or creatures, but not something that watches you think." Travis quietly preserved fragments of evidence through handwritten logs and voice recordings made on analog devices, machines incapable of of remote access. In one log, he wrote, "Whatever we encountered did not react to us. Its appearance triggered our observation systems. We weren't recording it, it was activating us." When production resumed, the Mesa episode was scrapped and replaced with safer content. Viewers saw controlled edits, lost equipment data, unstable weather, no mention of airborne anomalies. But earlier this year, during a private panel, Travis broke the script. Without naming specifics, he said, "There was one night when the ranch decided what it would let us see, and it chose something we weren't prepared for." That comment was cut from official release within 24 hours, but a leaked offline clip now circulates quietly among researchers. Travis ended his private memo with a chilling line. "We keep trying to study the phenomenon, but what if that night it was studying us? Not to harm, but to measure response." And that leaves one final question, the one the footage didn't erase. If it already knows how we react, what happens when it decides to test us again?